guys, it's Steph here and I'm here to do my November wrap-up part 2. So for those of you who haven't seen it, I did do a part 1 of my November wrap-up. I'll leave a link to it up here. And I read quite a few books at the start of the month. But in the second half of the month, I read 6 books and I started a 7th. So let's get straight into it. So the first book that I read in the second half of the month was Black Rock White City by A.S. Patrick, and I know I'm probably pronouncing the author's surname incorrectly. This is a book by an Australian author. It is set in Australia. It is set in Melbourne. It was the winner of the 2016 Miles Franklin Award for Literary Fiction. It was pretty damn good. It's not my usual kind of book. I think I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. It is about Jovan and his wife Susanna, and they fled Yugoslavia during the war there and came to Australia as immigrants. They moved to Melbourne. When they were living in Belgrade, they were literature professors. Jovan was a poet and Susanna was a writer, and she was writing her first novel. But here in Australia, after their experiences over there, they find themselves limited by language and by culture and by all of those sorts of things. And Jovan works as a cleaner at a hospital. Susanna, I believe, from memory, is a housekeeper. Throughout this story, we find out what it's like for them living with the after effects of having had to flee their country, having to move to another country, having to try and be accepted in that country where people can't even pronounce their names correctly and don't even bother to try. There's a backdrop of this at the hospital where Jovan works. There is a graffiti artist who is going around the hospital creating increasingly more difficult, increasingly more violent acts of graffiti around the place, and Jovan has to deal with it. Overall, this book is not an easy read. It's not an easy read by any stretch, and especially being not my particular genre, it is heartbreaking, it is confronting, and there were moments when I was just ready to start crying. But there is an undercurrent of hope in it, particularly throughout the ending. It is told from two perspectives. Predominantly it's told from Jovan's perspective, but Susanna also has chapters in this book as well. I really enjoyed this book. Next, I read Holding Up the Universe by Jennifer Niven. This did come in my YA Chronicles box a couple of months ago. It is the story of 2 teens. Libby Strout, who is known as the fattest teen in America, and she had to be cut out of her house when she was younger. Then you have Jack, who's a star athlete, but he is also face blind. And as you would expect, their paths cross. It's set in a high school, so it's, got full of all the high school dramatic social issues that come with that, while Libby has to deal with some quite severe bullying from people who just won't let her live down the fact that she did have to be cut out of her house. Although she's quite a confident character, and I did really like her because she stands up for what she believes in. And Jack, who is trying to fool everyone into believing that everything is fine and that he doesn't have a problem with recognizing who people are. And he has some quite extreme moments where he can't recognize people, and it actually has severe impact on him and his family. This one, I think I also gave 4 out of 5 stars. I did enjoy it. The YA contemporary, again, not my favorite genre, but yeah, I enjoyed this read. Thank you, YA Chronicles, for getting me to read something that I probably wouldn't have picked up on my own. Now for something that is entirely my genre, and that is World After by Susan E., which is the second book in the Penryn and the End of Days trilogy. I'm loving this series. I love all the characters in this book. I love the setting. I love the fact that angels have come down to Earth, have basically wrecked the place, and are taking over, and that humans are trying to pick up the pieces. Now, this is not a book for people who do not like gruesome, dark, scary things, because there are monsters. Susan E. does not shy away from description. There are some truly horrific things that have happened to characters, particularly from the first book into the second one. The second book does pick up straight after the first book, so I can't really talk about the plot too much because that will spoil the first book if you haven't seen it. I will say I was a little bit disappointed that Raph wasn't in this book. Now, I don't know whether it's Raph or Rafe. I'm going to assume that it's Raph because it's short for Raphael, but it is spelt like it should be pronounced Rafe. So I have no idea. If you know for sure, let me know down in the comments. Character Problems 101. He wasn't in this book as much, which I thought was a little bit disappointing because I think he has a hilarious dynamic with Penryn, and it adds a nice levity to such a dark series. But that said, I loved this book. I loved the direction that Penryn's family has gone in terms of character development. I love that Penryn is not perfect. She tries to make decisions based on how it will impact her and her family, and yet some of these decisions have, terrible outcomes. But she's trying to balance up her family and, the good of everyone. So I love this book. Cannot wait for the third. 4.5 out of 5 stars for this book. Next up, I read The Chemist by Stephenie Meyer, which I was really excited to pick up this month because I do love Stephenie Meyer's writing. This is a huge book. It took me a while to get into it, which is sort of symptomatic of most Stephenie Meyer books, I want to say, because I find that her standalones, she only has this standalone and Post, but they're quite slow to get into. But once you get into it, it is quite easy to get through the rest of the book. This is an adult book. It is sort of a thriller, and it was really an interesting read. So The Chemist is a former government agent who deals in chemistry, in particular in interrogation. She's on the run from her former agency because they're trying to kill her and because of what she knows. So really in this story we follow 3 main characters. We have our chemist, who goes by Alex in this story. We have a man named Daniel, who she was basically sent after. And we have Kevin, who does not get along with Alex at all. And I really loved their dynamic. I thought they were really interesting to read because they are just constantly at each other's throats. They don't trust one another. There is obviously a relationship that goes on in this book, and I have to say I didn't mind it too much, although it did feel a little bit too much like insta-love in a grown-up novel and a little too convenient. But that said, I really enjoyed this book. This is one of my favourite genres to read, that suspenseful mystery thriller type thing that's going on. There's plenty of action in it. It's probably not for the squeamish. There are probably trigger warnings in this book for people because there is definitely torture and other bits and pieces going on in here. So if those aren't your things, I probably wouldn't pick it up, but I did really enjoy it. Hopefully she puts out more books in this genre. I just wish that she would tighten up her openings because it was a little bit confusing at the start and a little bit dense to get through, but once I was about 100 pages in, I was good to go. And I gave The Chemist 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I read The Graces by Laura Eve, which was sent to me by Ellen Unwin for a review. And this is a story about a girl who is who's new in a town. She goes by River, which isn't her name. That's the name that she's chosen for herself. And she is enamored with a family in the town by the name of the Graces. The Graces have 3 children who go to her school, and they are the most popular of the most popular, but everyone in town says that the Graces are witches. So this is a magical realism story. It is young adult. It is, I want to say, a very typical sort of YA high school social drama sort of story with the magical realism thrown into it, because River is an interesting character. I don't think she's the most likable narrator, but that serves a purpose. So I spent the good part of it just wanting to smack River over the back of the head and tell her to, see what's really going on. Eventually, River befriends the Graces and falls into their inner circle and is invited to their house and to meet their family, which is something that doesn't happen very often with their friends. But as she becomes closer to the Graces, stranger things begin to happen, and this morphs into a very suspenseful sort of story for the last third of the book. I have to say there is a hell of a plot twist at the end. I did really like the ending. So prior to getting to the last part of the book, this was probably a 3 out of 5 star read for me. By the end, I did give it 4 out of 5 stars because it did have this really wonderful plot twist. I'm very curious to see where Laura Eve takes this series because it's the first book. Yeah, it should be really interesting to see what happens next with River and with the Graces. Last book that I finished this month was Trapped in Silver by Emily Soden. This was also a book that was sent to me for review by the publisher. So this is a YA fantasy book. It is about Ava, who lives on a farm with her father and her adopted brother, who is a family friend who's lost his family. She's never quite felt like she's in with the world around her, and she has had this locket that's been around her neck since she was very, very young, and she can't remove it. It's just always been there, and she's been haunted by these nightmares for her whole life. And one day she is attacked in her town, and she's swept up into a magical world where nothing is quite as it seems, and she discovers that the world is full of demons. And then there is an offshoot of this group called the Berserkers who are determined to wipe the demons out. And Ava becomes part of this plot, aka like a chosen one. the action takes off from there as the berserkers are trying to take possession of Ava and the demons are trying to stop them from doing that. This was a really interesting read. It did take me a little while to get into it. There is a very, very big shift from the world that Ava lives in to the world that she finds herself in. Yeah, I thought it took a little while to get there. I mean, you had to do setup, and it is the first book in a series, so this is a very series setup book. The characters themselves were pretty good. I did like Ava. She was quite a good protagonist. She's surrounded by some really interesting characters who I did really enjoy reading about. Overall, I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. It was quite a fun and enjoyable read. I do like books about demons in any of their forms. I think they're quite interesting, and I did like the way that Emily Soden sort of took a name of a group of characters and sort of twisted your perception of it, so I did really like that. I'm curious to see where she takes the series, and I will definitely be looking out for the next books. The last book that I started in November was the Fifth Avenue Artist Society by Joy Calloway, which was sent to me for review by Allen and Unwin, and I got about 50 pages in before the end of the month. So this is the story of Virginia Lofton, who goes by Ginny, and her family. She has 3 sisters and a brother. Two of her sisters are very artistic, just like she is, as is her twin brother, Franklin. Virginia is a writer, and this is set in 1891 in the Bronx. I know pretty much nothing about that time period, least of all that time period in America. Women are still not regarded as being able to become professional writers, and it follows Ginny's struggle to become a published author, set amongst a society that really is trying to prevent that. And she discovers the Fifth Avenue Artist Society, which is a gathering for artists of any kind, musicians, traditional artists, writers, poets, etc. And it's open to men and to women. They gather and they share their work and they offer critiques to each other. At the start, Ginny has just witnessed the love of her life proposing to another woman because of money, and she's devastated, and that fuels her need to pursue her dream so that she can support her family, live out her dream. And again, not my particular genre, young adult historical. I think historical is probably the genre that I have the hardest time with. Yeah, I'm curious to see where this goes. So I haven't finished it yet. I will get back to you in my monthly wrap-up in December. These are the physical books I read at the end of November. Thank you very much for watching. I hope that wherever you are in the world, you are having a wonderful day. Down in the comments, let me know what was your favourite book of November, and I will catch you guys in my next video. Thanks for watching. Bye.